To use our operation and get image data, we're going to add some code to the album list data source. So let's navigate there. After a cell has been set up with the initial data in cell for row at index path, we'll fire off a request for the album artwork. This way, we know that the user now sees actual album data on screen, and in the background, we're going to let this request process, and hopefully it'll reload with the new artwork. So in here, we'll say if album.artworkState equal placeholder. Remember, we are only doing this, we're only going to fire off a request if the current state is a placeholder, indicating that we haven't attempted to download the image yet, and the operation has neither failed nor completed successfully. So inside this if statement, we're going to call a new method, and let's go ahead and define that at the bottom. We'll say func download artwork for album, and this is going to be an instance of album. In this method, we're going to create an operation using the album, add it to the operation queue, and execute the logic. Remember, though, that we also want to keep track of the actual row which this album is in. Well, why is that again? When we fire off a download for the artwork, if that row scrolls off screen, there's no reason to continue the download, and we would have to cancel it. In addition, if we're reloading a table view, and we already have an operation processing in the background to download artwork for that particular row, we need to know that. We need to keep track of that so we don't create a duplicate operation and do the exact same work over again. Now, we need to keep track of this in a very simple way. And one easy way of getting this done is associating a download operation with a row's index path. So we'll say download artwork for album at index path, and we'll include the index path as an argument. To keep track of the operations and to create a queue, let's create a new type. So in networking, again, new file, Swift file, and we'll name this pending operations. In here, we're going to define a type with two simple stored properties. So we'll create a class called pending operations that contains a dictionary. We'll name it downloads in progress. This is a variable. And the type is index path to operation. And we'll just create an empty dictionary to start out. And then we also want a download queue. And this is an instance of operation queue. So the first property here is a dictionary that keeps track of operations created and the index paths they're associated with. To figure out what operations are associated with an index path, we can simply use the path as a key in this dictionary. The second property is an instance of operation queue, and this is the operation queue we're going to be adding our operations to. We're not going to customize this in any way. Now, a couple videos ago, I mentioned that with an operation queue, you could customize it by defining the max number of operations executed at any time, or at the same time. And we do this by setting a value on the max concurrent operation count property. By leaving it at its default value, we're going to let the system determine how many concurrent operations it can execute simultaneously, which honestly is the best approach. Okay, so now let's use this very simple type back in the album list data source. First, we need access to the dictionary to keep track of the operations we create, as well as the operation queue to add the operations. So let's add an instance of that new type as a stored property. Let pending operations, and we'll create an instance. So inside this method, we'll first start by checking to see if we've already created and added an operation for a given row. And the way we're going to do that is we'll check if we get a value back by using this index path as a key in that dictionary. So we'll say if let, and we'll omit the name because we don't care about the operation. We just want to know if it's in the actual dictionary. We'll say if let pending operations dot downloads in progress, and using subscript notation, we'll use the index path argument as a key. Now, if there is an operation, if this succeeds, then we enter the if let statement. It unwraps that operation. We don't care about it. Now that we know, though, that it does exist, that means we've already created an operation for this cell, for this row, and it's currently processing in the background. So we're not going to do anything else, and we'll return over here. If we haven't though, if this if-let statement fails, that means that we do not have an operation for this album at this index path. So now let's start the real work. Let's create an instance of the downloader with an album for that cell. So let downloader equal artwork downloader, and it takes an album. We'll pass the argument through. So remember, all the work we want to do is encapsulated in the main method of the operations subclass, including assigning the image back to this album instance. When the operation completes, the album will then have an image and we can display that image. To do so, however, we need to trigger the table view's reload process so that it can go through the data source methods again and assign the album artwork we've fetched to the cell's image view. There are two things to consider here. First off, how do we know when an operation completes? And second, why should we reload the entire table view just to set up one row again with artwork? If we do that, the table view would reload every millisecond, basically, as each individual download operation completed, because remember, we're creating one for every single row. Luckily, both these things are trivial to solve. When an operation completes, it executes a closure assigned to a stored property called completion block. So any code that we want to execute when an operation is complete, we define in a closure and then assign it to that stored property. So we say downloader.completion block, and to this we'll assign a closure. Like everything we do with an operation, we first want to check if the operation is canceled, even in here. Because even after the operation is complete, we could still go ahead and cancel it. So in your mind, think of it this way, like there's an operation running in the background, it gets the image, it assigns it back to the album, and then after that happens, but before it reloads, the user scrolls off screen. In that case, well, we potentially could cancel it. So in here, we need to check if it's canceled. We'll say if downloader is canceled, then again, we'll just return out of the block and do nothing. If our operation wasn't canceled, then we'll finish up by removing this operation from our dictionary, because since we're tracking active operations and this is completed, it doesn't need to stay in that dictionary anymore, and then we'll reload the table view. The reloading of the table view is UI code, so it needs to be done on the main thread, because remember, the operation is executed on a dispatch queue in the background. So here we'll call dispatch queue.main.async. And in here, we want to indicate that the operation is done for the purposes of tracking. So we'll remove it from our dictionary. We'll say self.pendingoperations.downloads in progress, remove value for key, and we'll use the index path again. That way, when it's reloaded, if the previous operation was complete, and let's assume that we don't have that artwork state property that monitors whether we've done that or not, the next time we come along, since we've removed it already, this would fail and we would go through the process again. After removing this operation, we need to reload the row so that we run through the setup again and assign the right image. Rather than reloading the entire table view, we need to make sure we reload just the row whose operation completed. And again, that's easy. And we'll do self.tableview. And the table view has a method, reload rows, and it takes an array of index paths. So we'll pass our current index path in, and then an animation style, and we'll say .automatic. It takes this array of index paths and reloads just those rows by calling the data source methods and passing in this selected set of index paths. Now, we have an error here, and that's because we don't have a reference to the table view outside of a data source method. So calling self.tableview is just going to return an error. We'll solve this by adding a stored property up at the top to hold on to our table view. So let table view, UI table view, and then we'll modify our init method. So we'll say table view, UI table view, and self.tableview equal table view. Now let's go back down to our method, and it should work. So there we go. And this wraps up the code we want to execute when the operation is complete. But remember, at no point here have we added the operation to the queue, nor have we added the operation to this downloads in progress dictionary to keep track of it. This part is easy though. So first, to add it to the dictionary, we'll say pending operations, or rather we'll add it to the queue first, .download queue, .add operation, and we'll pass in the downloader. passed through the downloader. So that's all we need to do on our end. The queue now keeps track of the operations and executes them in a particular order when they hit that ready state. We need to add one more line of code here, and that is to track the operation we just added. So pending operations dot downloads in progress, and using the index path as a key, we'll assign the downloader, which is our operation, as a value. When we add the operation to the queue, we keep track of it in our dictionary. When we call this method, at the top, we'll check that there is an operation in progress for the particular index path. If there is, well, then we don't do anything else. But if there isn't, we start this process all over. When the operation is done, as indicated in our completion block, we'll remove that particular key value pair from the dictionary. Now, we went ahead and modified our init method, so we will have an error in the album list controller.swift file. And that's up at the top here in our data source because we now need a table view. So let's fix that. We'll say lazy var data source, and we'll do this all over again. So we'll copy this. We'll again assign an executing closure. So album list data source equal, we'll call the closure, and inside we'll say return. And this time we're still going to initialize it with an empty array to start off, but now we can pass through self.tableview. We're not done yet, as always. If you run the app now, you still won't see any album artwork. But that's a simple fix, and we'll wrap it up with the rest of the project in the next video.